Millions more Americans just became gun owners. A look at Rob Pincus's unique activism style and an interview with Jim Geraghty of the National Review. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of TheReload.com, and I'm here again for our news update with contributing writer Jake Fogelman. We're going to do that before we get to our interview with the one and only National Review senior political correspondent, actually. Don't want to cut him short, Jim Geraghty, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the Chipman situation as well as the NRA. So before we get to any of that, though, let's talk about this week's biggest news story, starting with a new survey from the National Shooting Sports Foundation that detailed how many new gun owners have been created over the last 6 months here, the first 6 months of 2021. Now, Jake, you wrote a piece on this earlier in the week. Can you give us a little bit of background? What did they find? How many people bought a gun for the first time?
Sure, yeah. So the NSSF does regular retail surveys with their partnered gun retailers. So this one covered the first 6 months of this year, and the results of the survey found that they estimate about 3.2 million people became first-time gun owners just the first half of this year alone, which is a continuation of a trend that we saw obviously last year, where similar surveys estimated around 8.4 million new gun owners. So, it's pretty incredible to see survey data showing that there's about 11.6 million new gun owners just in the last 18 months. It's pretty unprecedented.
Yeah.
And so, it's big news. And
it's a lot of people. And it's well above the norm as well for how many new gun owners are created each year. Obviously, the last year and a half have been kind of a perfect storm for gun buying in America. A lot of the sort of motivating factors are there that you don't usually see all at once with the chaos of the pandemic, the rioting last year, the bad relations between police and minorities, the hate crimes against Asian Americans, food shortages, police, defund the police movement, and then obviously the politics of it is still front and center now. With President Biden pushing for, he just put in place a ban on new permits to import ammunition from Russian Russian-made companies. And so there's quite a lot of factors that go into why those numbers are so high, which I've written a bit about as an analysis piece too. But yeah, there's also, I would say, real quick, that there is some question as to how accurate those numbers are. Obviously, they're just an estimate, from an industry trade group, right? So they do this by asking dealers how many people they think were new customers, and so dealers are obviously in some position to give that kind of estimate, but it's not going to be a perfect number. And we really don't have a perfect number, because the other measure is usually public polling, where people are just directly asked if they're gun owners. And there's a lot of issues with that as well. But certainly, I think there could be major impacts, right? If there really were 11.6 million new gun owners created over the last year and a half.
Right. And experts we've talked to have pointed out to us it's not the most scientific method, but it does point to a trend, at least. As you said, dealers are in a good position to identify trends in the industry and in sales. And a few of the other things that the survey uncovered also show some of the motivating trends that you were talking about. Over 76% of every single dealer pointed to an increase in sales among minority groups, which is pretty incredible. We're talking about the fastest growing demographics in gun ownership are becoming minority groups, and that's reflected in these retail surveys.
Right. And that also has, I think, perhaps an even bigger impact on the political landscape for gun politics, because minority groups tend to own guns at a lower rate and tend to support gun control measures at a higher rate. But as more of them are becoming gun owners, you can see that change. It doesn't Now, I don't think it means that you're going to see that change overnight. People don't tend to instantly vote Republican Party line just because they bought a gun, a month ago.
Right.
But I think it'll have a more subtle impact, and a longer term impact, because these things don't necessarily develop overnight. Just because you bought a gun does not mean tomorrow you're going to become a gun voter, but it might mean in the long run, the next election cycle or two, you might be more inclined to care about that issue than you were before you bought it.
Absolutely.
So certainly that, I talk a little bit more about that in the members only analysis piece, but I think that's probably the biggest trend in guns on a macro level. That's going to have the biggest effect, and that's going to be the most important thing. But we also finished this week our exclusive interview with Rob Pincus, who is a gun rights activist. He's sort of a, countercultural gun rights activist, you might call him. He's sort of relishes going against the grain, I think, oftentimes. And so you get a taste of that in our piece, and I ask him why he operates that way and whether he thinks it has any sort of negative impact on what he's trying to do, or whether it's an advantage. I ask him all sorts of questions that I think a lot of people have for him. He's a very controversial figure, I would say. He's fairly influential one as well for someone who, isn't the head of a 5 million member organization, but is trying to reform one in the NRA. And so we get into the second interview. I think we get a little bit into his activism in the 3D printed gun world, where he was just involved with one of the first homemade firearms matches that I covered down in Florida a couple months ago. And then we talk a bit about his activism at the NRA and what he wants to see reformed there, some of the changes he wants to make. And I think it's a pretty interesting point of view. He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating series of interviews. As you said, he's kind of a lightning rod in the gun space. People love him, people hate him, but you can't deny that he has a big impact. And yeah, he's a good figure to interview in that series. People should definitely read it. Yeah,
and we did a third part to that interview that's for members only as well, where we get into his overall philosophy on guns and what, his willingness to sort of call out, practices that he sees as toxic or damaging within the gun owning community. And he lays out a vision for how he wants to reach people outside, of the echo chamber, if you will, of gun activism, and what he views as necessary for that to be successful in the long run. I mean, he talks about how he wants gun ownership to be a bipartisan issue. He wants to essentially eliminate the ability of any political party to take an anti-gun position, and he believes that doing that is going to be accomplished by, activism in areas of the American community where people aren't as likely to own firearms.
Right. And it's interesting to see that coincide sort of what we were talking about with survey data showing new demographics getting into guns, seeing outspoken activists like Pincus coming out and making that their mission to get everyone involved. And you're starting to see that reflected in these legacy groups, like this new NRA ad you covered for the Reload this week. Sort of reflects that same ethos.
Yeah, it's an interesting ad. So the NRA, there's an NRA instructor who is a member of the group's outreach committee who does a training every year in Detroit. He's a African-American guy who lives in Detroit, and he's a trainer there. And he does this training for black women specifically to try and encourage them to learn how to use firearms safely. And it's been growing every year. It's extremely successful. And this last year, they trained over 4,000 women at this event. And the NRA, frankly, did a smart thing and went and profiled him for an ad. He's an NRA certified instructor and an NRA member and an advocate for the NRA, and he's doing this amazing event. and it's I think one of the better ads that the group has put out in a long time. Frankly,
Sure.
Obviously they've had issues in the black community in the past, especially surrounding how they handled the Philando Castile shooting, where a lot of people were unhappy with the lack of, I guess, NRA involvement in that, given that he was a concealed carry holder and he was killed by a police officer for under at least very questionable circumstances. I think everyone's probably seen the video and can judge for themselves what happened in that situation. But I think a lot of black gun rights activists wanted them to do more, and they didn't. And so they've come under scrutiny for that in the past. But here they are, at least, trying to appeal to African Americans and women, and really the ad is about reaching out to all kinds of different demographics, all kinds of different people, and saying that guns are for everyone. Except for maybe leftists, I guess that's the the ad is not. It's not very bipartisan, I suppose. It's a lot about how the left.
The NRA can only change so much.
Yes, it's a lot about how the left doesn't approve of black gun ownership, and hey, maybe you could make that case that certainly there are some people on the left who would not approve of that, of what they were doing at that event. So fair enough, but yes, it is an interesting ad, and I think it was worth highlighting and showing people that here's something the NRA is doing. The NRA is a very big group. It's a large organization. There's plenty of things to scrutinize and critique, but there's also plenty of things that they do that people, you don't want to hide. It wouldn't be fair or reasonable or balanced to hide the stuff they're doing that is worthy of highlighting in this way. So that's
Absolutely.
So we wrote about it, and I think people should go and watch it and judge for themselves what they think of the ad. But as for the rest of what's going on with the NRA, we're actually going to talk a bit about that with Jim Geraghty here in a moment. So let's head on over to Jim. We are here with Jim Geraghty, author and National Review political correspondent, senior political correspondent. Is that right?
It is, Stephen. That's what you call a political correspondent who gets old. Yes, thank you for having me. And by the way, congratulations on, I would say, the launch of the Reload. I guess it's been launched for a while, but you have already become, the shortest of the short list of go-to reporters on all gun issues. And going off and doing this on your own is that took courage, my friend. So good for you. I'm glad to see it's thriving, and very happy to be with you.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. Can you tell people a little bit about yourself? Anyone who might not know who you are listening, just give a little bit of background on
Sure. I'm a cancer 6'2". No, sorry. So I've been with the National Review in one form or another, really since 2004 full time, 2002 as a freelancer. Started out writing something called the Kerry Spot during the 2004 presidential campaign. I joke that every time John Kerry opened his mouth, I had to write 250 words. Very popular, took off, went over to Turkey for 2 years, where my wife was working for the embassy out there, and tried my hand as a foreign correspondent. As things got worse overseas, it was easier for me to get pieces in places, bird flu. And Stephen, this is back when bird flu seemed like a real health threat. Came back and covered the 2008 presidential election for National Review, and I've kind of been on the politics and elections beat for them ever since. Then March 2020 came along, and the pandemic overtook our lives, and with really, I'm not going to brag, I'm not a doctor, I don't play one on TV, not an enormous amount of grounding in science and health reporting and stuff like that. Dove into the pandemic just because I was surrounded by so many people who were like, holy crap, what's going on? What do I need to know? That kind of stuff. And so that became a big part of my beat. Wrote a little bit about those labs in Wuhan and the weird coincidence that they were working on, doing gain-of-function research on novel coronaviruses in bats, when we just happened to have this novel coronavirus that's found in bats come around and get us. So that's occupied a big chunk of my time. And then Afghanistan is the latest story that I kind of knew a little bit about. And I've just been hearing from my readers who are very much involved in the effort to get people out of there. And they're just unloading unbelievable information day after day about the ongoing efforts out there. So I guess this kind of makes me a little bit of a jack of all trades master. And in the middle of all this, earlier back in 2004, I started joining our mutual friend Cam Edwards on his program on the late NRA TV, or at that point it was just called NRA News. So guns and Second Amendment became a part of my regular beat. I wouldn't pretend to know it the way you and Cam and those guys do. I think probably just more like it's funny for a long time how the NRA convention wasn't quite the Republican National Convention sort of an event, but you'd get a lot of big name speakers out there. And if it wasn't quite a Republican primary early audition, it was the kind of place, if you were a strong on the Second Amendment politician, you wanted to appear and you wanted to make your pitch, because 80,000 people attend. Maybe not all 80,000 people would be in the hall when you would appear, but a big chunk of them would. And if you did a good job with that crowd, that would help you out. I think Sarah Palin was at the first one I went to, I want to say in Charlotte in like 2009, 2010, somewhere there. So, and also
and
the NRA
one,
convention is also where I usually get to see you, Stephen. That's why I was
right.
so bummed it did not occur this year.
The last one, unfortunately got canceled due to, our latest wave of COVID infections, which you've also, as you mentioned, been keeping up with in your coverage. But the last NRA annual meeting featured the Leadership Forum, which is where all the political speeches happen, and that was in Lucas Oil Stadium, right, where the Colts play. Mm-hmm. So it gives you an idea of scale there. That's the first time I've ever been on an NFL field, on the field. So that was cool. But
and the moment you put your hand on your feet on the artificial turf, you've torn ACL and you're out for the rest of the year. That's how that's how it works. Yeah.
Yes.
Also, there were a lot of years for the NRA convention. It would have NRA annual meeting is the official name. I keep calling it the NRA convention, but the lot of fun. One day of really solid work for me. Then walk around, take pictures of the cool guns and gear and all that kind of stuff, and then getting to enjoy some city. Sometimes with my colleagues like Charlie Cook, sometimes with Cam, stuff like that. And the last year, 2019, was Indianapolis, right?
Yes.
There was actual
news.
That
is where the Colts. That's
right. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Well, these cities kind of blur. I'm trying to remember which steakhouse was that. It was the really way I'm trying to remember.
That was Max and Irma's.
Yes, the fantastic.
Which is great. And by the way, people listening, we don't get into food coverage much here, but if you do go to Indianapolis, you've got to not only get the steaks at Max and Irma's, but which are fantastic, by the way, but get the shrimp cocktail. That's right. That's their famous thing.
Yeah, who would figure fantastic shrimp in Indiana? But yes, that was off the charts.
It's like a punch in the face, that cocktail sauce they've got there.
But anyway, it was there was actual big news here that year, because that was when all these reports of excessive and really ludicrously unjustifiable spending started bubbling up to the top. A small amount of NRA board members and members were very upset about this. I think it's safe to say that. And here's the thing: I'm just going to jump right into this, Stephen, unless you wanted to steer me.
Well, actually, we'll save the NRA stuff for a little bit later, because I do want to get into that. But first, the big reason that I had you on is because of your experience and expertise in, the politics of all of this. Not obviously with Afghanistan, COVID, foreign policy stuff. You're great on that, as you mentioned earlier, but you're also really good at just understanding the impact of different stories on the political landscape. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about, the second thing will be the NRA, because I think that's interesting too. But first I wanted to talk a little bit about the ATF nomination failing. Biden pulling his nominee, David Shipman, just recently here, and what that says, I think, going forward for the president's gun control agenda, the laws that he wants to get passed.
All right. Well, Stephen, I won't embarrass you in front of all of the viewers and listeners by saying that you can count on one hand the people who stopped the Shipman nomination, and you probably are on that hand, or you could count it on the hand of a Lebanese bomb maker who may have lost a few along the way. There's very few people who did more to derail that. So I think you're entitled to take a bow on that. But what's more, look, this is for all the problems of this administration, and it's certainly in much rougher shape now than it was in January, February, March, the first couple of months, they really haven't had many problems getting their people confirmed. The Office of Management and Budget, right? That the near attendance,
yes.
was kind of the one that comes to mind. Other than that, the people Biden have picked, all usually start with 50 Democratic votes to go, and most Republicans, and I think in a defensible position, I don't think you do yourself much good by taking the attitude of I'm going to vote against every nominee that the party of the opposing party chooses to nominate. If this person's reasonable, I'm going to vote for him. The president has a right to pick the cabinet they want. They have a right to pick the administration with the people they want, assuming they don't have a terrible scandal or they're not unbelievably corrupt or incompetent or evil or something like that. Chipman may have checked all those boxes. That he was about as controversial a choice as we would have expected from Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, the guy who earlier in his career used to say, I tell Jill, if you're worried about a home invader, get yourself a shotgun and just fire it out the window. That every now and then Joe Biden would claim that he wasn't that anti-gun or pro-gun control, or that he knew what was going on with those gun owners and stuff like that. He's good old backslapping Scranton Joe. He knows about this kind of stuff. And then by 2020, he's got Beto O'Rourke and saying, you're going to help me solve the gun issue. And if Joe Biden had any objection to Beto O'Rourke's, hell yeah, we're going to take your AR-15s. I didn't hear Joe Biden objecting to that at all. So gun owners and Second Amendment supporters and right of center folk for whom this is a big issue, we had no illusions that Joe Biden was going to be bad on this issue. The question was, how bad was he going to be? And in the hierarchy of policy priorities, how high was gun control going to be? There are times, like in the aftermath of something like the Parkland shooting, where the Democratic Party seems, first of all, there almost are no pro-gun, or gun owners don't see a lot of Democrats who they would define as pro-gun. It's like looking back at I know you don't want me to talk about the NRA conventions too much, but like Jim Webb, I'm pretty sure, spoke at one of them. Heath Schuler, the former North Carolina congressman and Washington Redskin quarterback, and a couple, occasionally you'd get a couple House Democrats or one or two Senate Democrats speaking at the NRA convention. The NRA took great pride in saying, look, we are a bipartisan organization. We'll work with anybody who's pro-gun. We are not a Republican organization. Those Democrats are fewer and further between. You're really tough to find anybody, and if they have those views, they're certainly not outspoken about them. They really don't want people to, quiet neutrality is about the best you can expect out of the Democratic Party when it comes to the Second Amendment these days. And the rest of them are just straight up vehement, either opposed to the Second Amendment, or I guess probably the most common way of characterizing Steve, they simply want to ignore the Second Amendment. They simply don't think that that any of their gun control proposals are in violation of it. That anything that strikes them is bad. And it doesn't matter if you point out that this isn't really effective as a crime control policy, and all you end up doing is creating more headaches for law-abiding legal gun owners. And if you could do stuff like go after straw purchases and stuff like that, you'd have a bigger impact in places like Chicago. There is just almost this rote, unthinking, the problem is AR-15s, the problem is gun owners, that kind of stuff in the Democratic Party. And I think this reflects kind of this cultural and demographic split between the two parties. Like, you used to be able to find Republicans in cities and Democrats in rural areas. You used to be able to find blue-collar whites who were proud members of the Democratic Party, their fathers of the Democratic Party, the grandfathers, going back JFK, FDR, and both parties are much more kind of culturally homogeneic. So my suspicion is that if you're a gun owner, if you thought of yourself as a Democrat 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you've probably drifted over to the Republican Party, probably partially the gun issue, and probably also other issues. Could be everything from abortion and cultural and values issues to just a sense of the Democratic Party starting to embody a urban elitism that looks down upon you. And vice versa, that there are probably people who might have been Republicans, but who are kind of pro-gun control, like suburban soccer mom types or something like that, who have now flipped to the Democratic Party, not wholeheartedly, but in really significant numbers. So, we expected things to be bad under Biden. The Chipman defeat is a really pleasant surprise for folks on the right who haven't had too many pleasant surprises in this administration so far.
Well, I guess one question I'd have for you on that point is, obviously it was the Democrats who blocked this nomination. Certainly Joe Biden, obviously as a Democrat himself, put up the nomination and perhaps pushed the limits of what was possible here, even with a Democratic majority in the Senate from the very beginning, given Chipman's background as a literal paid gun control activist. He works for the Giffords Group, which is one of the nation's most prominent gun control organizations. And he holds a number of policy positions that are further left on guns than most Senate Democrats publicly hold, including wanting to not just ban AR-15s, but subject them to, not just banning new sales, but subjecting the currently owned ones to the National Firearms Act, which would require registration and tax stamps and presumably would make you a felon if you didn't comply. So, he already had these things that were going to be big hurdles in getting him confirmed in a 50-50 Senate. But at the same time, obviously, the more news came out, and of course, by our reporting at the Reload on his background and some of the questions over his conduct with other agents, especially black agents, one of which directly told me that he believed Chipman tried to torpedo his career during a promotion assessment for reasons of racial bias. Now, the Department of Justice confirmed that there was an investigation initiated by Chipman. But they also said they also claimed that he has no. They defended Chipman, said he didn't have a racial bias, and so that probably had some impact as well, as you alluded to. I think probably a significant impact. Although obviously the reporting is, the goal was not to take down a nominee; it was to scrutinize his background as you're supposed to do in journalism. I'm glad it had an impact in terms of people reading it and taking it seriously. But yeah, I think his nomination was always a bit of a long shot. In hindsight, perhaps it's difficult to get an ATF director confirmed, but it was ultimately Democrats who blocked him because he didn't need any Republicans to be confirmed. So, I don't know. What is that? What do you think that says? Because I think the general thrust of what you said, it makes sense, right? That there has become a more polarized, the issues become more polarized over the last couple of decades, and Democrats have moved further away from policies that gun owners are supportive of and towards more gun restrictions. And, the Republican Party has moved in the other direction. And so groups like the NRA have certainly, you see this in their ratings, and you see this in their, who shows up to their annual meeting to speak. I guess there's also a question of how much of that is them reacting to that dynamic and how much of it is them driving that dynamic. I think that's something that's really interesting to think about. Is this just are they just being dragged along in this way, or is the NRA contributing to that sort of polarization, or the gun control groups themselves, are they by becoming sort of identity groups more than single issue groups? You see this. I talk about this a lot with the ACLU. Has done similar strategic moves where they're less about civil liberties in particular now and more about being a general liberal identity group.
Yeah. One of the kind of factors that was always at work in this is every Senate Democrat knows every president usually has a bad midterm. Going back to you got to go back to 2002 to find the last time the president's party really not only do you not usually have a good midterm, usually you get slammed. Mm-hmm. And we've seen the party lose the majorities of at least one chamber in Congress in 2018, 2014, 2010, 2006. You can see the clear pattern there. So there's this ticking clock in the minds of Senate Democrats. They really only have 2 years to get stuff done the way they want to get it done. And they recognize they've only got the 50-50 split in the Senate, and they actually don't even have that many. They've done the 3 or 4 in the House with all the vacancies they've had. So, they keel over or take positions in the administration, and all of a sudden what looked like okay, we're going to be all right majority turns into just a handful. And, one flight being late on Monday from California, and all of a sudden you don't have the majority in the House that you thought you're going to have. So they're operating with a very tight margin. So the question is, okay, all of these votes are going to be tough. All of these votes are going to require a lot of arm twisting. Which ones? What do we really want to pass, and what is worth taking a political risk to pass? Now, they're trying to get infrastructure spending. They're trying to get. Oh, this is a terrific time for my phone to call. I betcha.
We had phone calls
certain,
last week too.
They're almost certainly this is. We're calling to reach you about your car's warranty.
Oh yeah. I get those all the time. And the worst thing is, as a reporter, like most people, who has phone calls anymore?
Exactly. Right. Text me. I don't recognize this number. Most people wouldn't care. No.
They just ignore it. But I got to answer all.
Right. Maybe it's a source. Maybe it's somebody.
It could be a source. Yeah. So I'm always getting.
It's David Chipman's neighbor to tell you what he's gone.
It's awful.
No, but, so trying to remember my train of thought. So if you're a Senate Democrat. Most Senate Democrats are in safe states, but there are a handful that aren't. I don't think Angus King is in enormous chance of losing his seat in Maine, but really antagonizing his state's gun owners probably would put him at a point where he'd really have to sweat about it. Susan Collins ended up winning by a fairly reliable margin in Election Day 2020. But King, keeps telling us he's an independent. He caucuses with the Democrats. You got to look really hard to see where you can find a difference between Angus King's positions and most other Democrats. But actually, the case of the Chipman nomination, maybe he's given us all a very vivid example of a nominee who was okay to the majority of other Democrats, and really most other red state Democrats. There was not an enormous, but Angus King, either he was genuinely bothered by Chipman, or he could figure out that voting for Chipman was going to give the gun owners in his state, mad as hell about it, and ready to walk across broken glass to vote for whoever was running against him. And one of the things that is intriguing about the gun issue, going back, to the Bush years, it's not just the country has a lot of gun owners; it's also a matter of where they live, and it tends to be swing states. There are gun owners in New York State, but it's not really a state you necessarily think of as a gun issue, and unfortunately, they don't necessarily have. Things have not been moving in the right direction there. But think about swing states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin. And then, actually, ironically, in the last couple of cycles, Maine has been one of these states that is a swing state. Donald Trump winning a congressional district and getting one of those electoral votes and things like that. So if you're Angus King, the midterms are going to go badly. 2, the Biden administration is going to ask you to take some votes that might not be kind of popular. This probably was a bridge too far. This probably was like, I can't go any further than this. I'm just not going to do it. And the other thing, which I think kind of alluded to, is that if David Chipman had been this universally revered law enforcement official who had, everybody loved him, and boy, he was swell, and he, rescued a bus of orphans from terror, whatever, if he'd gone in with a sterling reputation, then maybe other, not just Democrats, maybe the Lisa Murkowski's and Susan Collins of the world would have said, okay, well, he's a swell guy and we trust him to enforce the laws against gun control. But he's not. And as you said, he's a gun control activist, quite extreme, going to positions that even most, purple state Democrats would not feel comfortable going. So the other thing also is look, if the administration wants to set gun policy, you can set it from the White House. I don't want to say the ATF director doesn't matter, but you can find somebody who will give you a lot of what you want out of David Chipman without being David Chipman, who won't have his glaring weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. So
maybe. Maybe. I do want to talk to you a little bit about what you just brought up here, because I wrote an analysis piece over at the Reload on this topic of where things go from here. It's a members piece, but so people should buy a membership.
Well, that's why people should become members. Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I think that you've articulated what I had noticed as well, which is this might have been the end, the one opportunity really that Biden had to appoint an ATF director, a Senate confirmed one at least. Obviously the agency will continue to function with the acting director as it's been functioning to this point. But the timetable to nominate someone else is very short before the midterms, and I don't see these Democratic senators who blocked this nomination, King, Manchin, Tester, maybe Sinema, wanting to take this issue up again during the election year, during 2022. And I don't know that they'd have the time to get it through by the end of this year, especially with everything else going on. They're going to have a fight over the debt ceiling and budget.
And if you're going to take a controversial vote on an ATF director, you want it as far from election day as possible. You want it to be, the last thing you want to do is to have a really controversial vote that's going to stir up people in your home state right before election day. So
exactly. And then from there, you also have the problem, as you mentioned, that Democrats are probably going to lose seats. I mean, they'll almost certainly lose seats in the House. I'd actually be interested in your take on what the Senate is going to look like. But they're probably to make this kind of vote easier, to get a Chipman-esque nominee through, someone who isn't just a career ATF guy, but who is an activist who will sort of shepherd through the president's agenda on guns, in a way that can sidestep Congress. That's going to require probably more Democratic senators.
Yeah,
it seems like at this point. Maybe you could find someone that would act the same way Chipman does and give the president the same kind of political benefit with the gun control groups that Chipman does. I kind of doubt it, but who isn't as controversial personally. But that seems unlikely. I just don't know that there's a candidate like that out there.
Yeah, any ATF director nominated by Joe Biden would be seen by most gun owners as a pro-gun control figure. I think that's
right.
But the question is how gun control and kind of how antagonistic is this figure in their public statements and speeches and stuff like that. And
right. I mean, because the problem is if you let's say everything's the same, they don't lose any seats in the Senate. After the midterms, which is probably a rosy picture of where things are headed. They're still why would their vote change on why would these senators who blocked Chipman be any more amenable to just Chipman 2.0? Instead, King himself, from what my sources tell me, put up the names of the current ATF acting director and another former acting director who are both career people to get through. And so you could probably get someone like that through. But the question becomes, what's the point of doing that?
How much value, ironically, you're seeing a very similar issue at the FDA, where you may have noticed there's this little thing called a pandemic going on, and yet there still is not a full, we're still having a Food and Drug Administration run by an acting director. You kind of think that this administration, we're all about the pandemic, would have, jumped on that a little bit earlier. If you're happy with the way the organization is operating under an acting director, if you want to make him a full form, go ahead, fine. If there's not going to be enormous opposition in the Senate, fine. But in the end, it doesn't make it. His powers are the same. His ability to function is largely the same. I guess it basically comes down to political capital. A new president coming into town in January can go to almost any member of his party in the House or Senate and say, "Look, I really need your vote on this," and 99 times out of 100 they'll get it. It's one of those things. Now, when you are 9 months into your presidency and you have a 42% approval rating in Quinnipiac, you don't have that same political capital, and you don't have that same pull. And maybe you've spent that. I really need your vote on the COVID stuff, or you may have really used. I need your vote on some other nomination or the infrastructure bill or something like that. Or maybe you're somebody like Bob Menendez, who's not often a critic of Democrats, but who's really PO'd about Afghanistan. So maybe they're not in the mood to do a favor for you, particularly if they think there's going to be blowback in the next upcoming election. So, I think in the end, Biden, in his heart, he's pro-gun control. That's almost a given. The question of how much political capital he's willing to expend in pursuit of pro-gun control legislation and goals, it was always a question of that to begin with. The interesting thing, remember he said, I'm going to have veto in my cabinet, and It's behind me, Steve, and I have a milk carton, and on the side it says, "Have you seen me?" and has Beto O'Rourke underneath it. Have you seen? Is he abducted by aliens? Did he? There's a question of how much this is really a priority for the Biden administration, and I think this fight is going to make the Biden administration probably even more reticent. He'll refer to it. He'll give speeches. He'll be fine on that. But the idea of expending political capital to enact pro-gun control stuff, I think, it's the old saying, once bitten, twice shy.
I don't know. I think he's willing to do it. I just don't think he has the pull to get. He doesn't have the pull to get Chipman through. There's no way that they're going to get any sort of gun control bill through the Senate right now, and so he would do it if he could, and so that's why he's doing things like the executive orders to try and outlaw, pistol braces and redefine the what constitutes a firearm and give the ATF broader powers. And then the other part of that was supposed to be David Chipman, who worked at the ATF and is a paid gun control activist, would shepherd through a lot of these moves where the president was using his power to unilaterally enact new regulations on guns in what the most expansive way he possibly could under, without violating the federal law, though, honestly, these executive orders will probably be challenged in court, and it's not clear that they're going to, stand up to that challenge. But I think it's interesting to see where this all goes. I just don't see how he's going to have an opportunity to appoint someone that would be worth it to him to appoint to the ATF. This is probably why there's so few, there's only been one confirmed director. It's not just that it's hard to get these guys confirmed. It's also like there isn't that much payoff to it. Yeah. Versus how much political capital you got to spend to do it. Like, sure, he could probably easily get the current acting director through. You probably get a number of Republican votes on that too. But what advantage does that bring him politically? Yeah, I mean, the agency, a lot of agents would like a confirmed director because he can, really the main difference is that he can serve for a longer period of time. An acting director can only serve a year at a time. And so they're constantly moving through the heads of this law enforcement agency, which is, not great.
Yeah, not ideal.
But most presidents want to get a guy that's their guy in there rather than like just take a career guy and make him the head because they want to leave their mark or they want to run their gun control agenda or their agenda on guns generally through the ATF by having a political appointee in there that's going to be willing to work with them and do, fulfill their agenda. And if Biden can't get someone like that through, which it doesn't seem like he can now, probably for the rest of his term, because I doubt the rest of his first term, because I doubt that the midterms are going to go well enough to where it'll be easier for him to get someone like that through. So, they say they're going to nominate someone else, but it's just a question of like, who are you going to nominate and why would their nomination go any better than Chipman's did? And, maybe they find that Goldilocks candidate. Who knows? We'll have to keep tuned in on it, but I think it's going to be a stretch. And then, obviously he's not guaranteed a second term. If he wins re-election and gets a bigger majority in the Senate, then all bets are off and he can do what he wants.
Ironically, I guess we probably should acknowledge that, Joe Biden is getting up there in years. He doesn't like to give speeches at night. He wanders around the White House, but he's on the lawn sometimes. So the idea that Biden's getting up, the idea of does Biden finish his first term? As much as I disagree with the man, as much as I can't stand him, as much as I've had real vehement, passionate disagreements with the decisions he's made, I hope he lives to be 100 and I hope he enjoys good health. But let's assume for the moment maybe he doesn't, and at some point he has to step down. And we're dealing with President Kamala Harris. I do think that would be I think it's probably much more likely that would be the symbolism of the issue would be more important to her, and I could see her making gun control a more focused just a higher priority in a Kamala Harris administration. Just looking at her record as California Attorney General and stuff.
I mean, maybe. I mean, Biden's whole career, he's definitely very dedicated to gun control. And obviously he's very old, like Trump is very old. Apparently all we can find to run for president now are very old people.
You have to be in the cast of Cocoon if you're running for president now, apparently. But
I think I think his health will probably hold out. I don't know. Who knows? I don't see any signs that he's about to resign or anything like that. But
Stephen, that was 4 or 5 days ago. Get hanging off the plane.
Yeah, sure. I know. He makes gaffes just like Trump made gaffes, and Biden has made gaffes his entire career.
That's a good point. It's really tough to get a baseline of normal behavior and statements from Biden to measure
which is true of a lot of politicians, especially our current batch of very bombastic politicians that are popular now. They've long have said crazy, wacky things, and so it's going to be kind of hard to tell when things are not right with them, because they're always doing crazy stuff. But anyway, I mean, and Kamala, is she more committed to gun control than Biden? Maybe. I mean, publicly in her stated positions, yeah. But I mean, I think that comes from the fact that she was a politician in California and he was a politician in Delaware. And, I don't know what her true beliefs are, at the core. I think Biden is pretty personally dedicated to the issue.
I guess and you're right, maybe it's the cosmetic difference. I can't see Kamala Harris giving that stick shotgun out the window speech, and pretending that she knows it gets along with gun.
But that's like
I can hear her
Biden's
laughing,
goofy nonsense.
Exactly.
That advice is illegal.
Yeah, but
you can't fire warning shots off into the air. That's that's a
Biden
stupid thing that he said. I know that he's trying to be like the gun. Oh yeah, I
get you guys.
Guns too,
I know how you guys feel. Yeah, and I don't think that Harris would feel
that never came off as
any
like
need to play
anyway.
that. I guess what I'm saying the difference is that Kamala Harris doesn't feel a need to fake it.
Maybe,
does. And maybe that's
maybe she
that's
would though if she ever won a race that mattered with a general election. She never got that far in her career. She was
which, by the way, I think
Attorney General in California. You don't exactly have to play to the middle to get that role.
I was going to say, look, a lot of Republicans competing to be chief prosecutor in San Francisco. They're just notorious out there.
Right.
Yeah. So,
but I just all I'm saying is I wouldn't be surprised if when Kamala runs for president, whenever that's going to be, if she took a more centrist track than she did when she was running in the Democratic primary for California Attorney General. You know what I mean? We'll have, that's all speculation at this point. What I want to talk about though is, as well is to get back to the NRA, and the situation that they're in, because, we went to the last annual meeting together, which happened to have been 2 years ago at this point, thanks to the pandemic.
Actual news and earthquakes at that one. And little did we know it would be the last one for God knows how many years. But
I know. You would not have thought that at the time, of course, but it was a very eventful one, too. That was really the beginning of the public fight over these allegations of corruption that have been levied against NRA executives like CEO Wayne LaPierre and others. And there's been some significant updates on that over the last week. One, they had to cancel their annual meeting, which is where they have what's called the members meeting, which is what you're referring to. In 2019, that was big. There's big blow up at that, not literal, but the figurative blow up of like a lot of members came in and were very upset with allegations that of misuse of funds by the NRA, by NRA executives, misuse of NRA funds for personal and luxury expenses like private flights and suits and yacht trips, fancy vacations, all this stuff to the tune of millions and millions of dollars over several decades, tens of millions of dollars really over several decades. That had just broken in the New Yorker, I believe. Mike Spies, the reporter, he had gotten leaked documents from the NRA's audit committee and wrote a very explosive, again figuratively explosive piece on these allegations. And then news came that the New York Attorney General was investigating them, and eventually she filed suit and is now attempting to dissolve them, shut them down completely, which is a pretty shocking thing. You know, all sides of this are fairly shocking. It would be a very unusual thing for that. Really, the first time ever, I think, that an organization the size of the NRA, with the political clout that it has, to be shut down over even serious allegations of misconduct would be unprecedented, really.
Yeah.
And but so the members' meeting happens at the annual meeting. The annual meeting just got canceled again for the second year in a row, thanks to COVID. And now they've actually rescheduled it. They've told the board that it's going to happen on October 2nd in Charlotte, North Carolina. They haven't released a location yet as of when we're recording this podcast. But so that's where members are actually supposed to be able to voice their, opinions and feelings to the leadership. That's like the official venue for it, and they can offer resolutions. There was a resolution at the 2019 meeting, which basically was the resolution was for Wayne LaPierre and the audit committee and a number of other board members to resign, which created a lot of that controversy in the shouting match that happened that we were both witness to, and so now the annual meeting's canceled. It's unlikely that a lot of members are going to show up for this members meeting that they've rescheduled, and haven't announced like 3 weeks out. And then also you have the Attorney General updating the brief in the case, where she makes a number of new allegations.
Yeah.
A lot of them came from testimony during the bankruptcy trial. Boy, there's a lot.
Yeah, you're trying to summarize like 2 to 3 years worth of news. And
the NRA tried to file bankruptcy to avoid the New York dissolution suit. It didn't work, but there was a lot of testimony in that case that was damaging towards the NRA and its executives. And now a lot of that has been incorporated into a new brief in the New York case, and that's where we're at today. So do you want to maybe give your take on what's coming from the NRA, like what the situation generally?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say, Stephen, I'm glad you're staying on top of this and covering this, because this has been one of the... before I was dealing with like mass death from pandemics and mass death in Afghanistan, I thought this was a depressing story. Now it looks cheery and happy by comparison. And I say that in the sense that, like, this was after Election Day 2020, the NRA looked like, I don't say kings of the world, but like, they had done... 2016, pardon me, yeah. Yes. That they had mobilized in those upper Midwest states for Donald Trump. Yeah. Women who were gun owners turned out to be a really key demographic, and because it was so close, you could point the finger to any organization and said, yes, they were the one that made the difference. But there was a really strong argument to say that the NRA had a big part in Donald Trump's win. I mean,
they were the first outside group to really back him and put money behind him.
There were a lot of conservative or right-of-center organizations that looked at Trump and were like, ugh. But in part, I think, Donald Trump Jr. Had a role with that. He's always been very active in hunting and gun control stuff. And in a general sense that, for all of the flaws that Donald Trump has, I think he recognized that if he was going to be the Republican nominee, he had to be pro-life. If he wanted to be the Republican nominee, he had to be pro-gun. So any past statements he had made that were supportive of gun control or stuff like that, forgotten, and that he was going to be their guy and he was going to stand up for them. And were you at the one in Louisville where Trump just won? Yeah,
he was the first president to speak at the convention since.
Well, this was the year this was 2016. This is the year he was a candidate, and I was waiting for there to be some wariness or that the crowd loved him from the moment one. So it was one of those things where okay, we're going to ride or die with this guy, and he won. And if Wayne LaPierre had decided he was going to retire in early 2017. He'd be remembered as a hero of the Second Amendment, and none of these controversies ever would have stuck to him. I think if you look at a lot of organizations become big and powerful, you can probably find some spending that is iffy, that end up being perks for the top executives and stuff like that, that is debatable about whether it really is for the good of the organization, or whether it really should be counted as additional compensation. Because, oh, by the way, if the organization is spending it, you're not paying taxes on it. You're not paying taxes on that private jet and stuff. The compensated meals and the hotel stays and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, which will probably be a big issue for Wayne LaPierre and others at some point, I would imagine, down the line after this civil case is settled.
Yeah, and here's the thing. People like myself, and I'm going to be, I looked at that and said, well, this is really not justifiable. And unfortunately, I think this quickly this was completely misconstrued by two significant groups. The first were the number of either mainstream media, liberal media, however you want to characterize them, who thought this was a gun issue. Actually, no, this is a lawyers and money issue. This, that old saying, send lawyers, guns, and money. That ultimately that really had very little to do with actually gun rights, Second Amendment, stuff like that. It was entirely what is an appropriate expenditure for a national organization that is involved in a cause, and how much should it be spending on stuff that the executive and the top level folks get to enjoy that is not easily, clearly directed to the actual running of the organization. And was the National Rifle Association's finances basically turning into a big money piggy bank or petty cash drawer for anything Wayne LaPierre and other folks wanted? And some of this ties into Ackerman and McQueen, the large public relations firm that was being spent, was creating NRA TV. There were a lot of questions. People think, why are we spending all this money on this, and what are we getting in return? And it was, I think a lot of these questions were really legitimate. Unfortunately, something was a minority of the board that really had a problem with it. And so, like I said, the first group were the liberal media who didn't get it. And then there were people who saw this as, the liberal media is going after Wayne LaPierre. Now, in a lot of cases, the liberal media is going after Wayne LaPierre, but that doesn't mean Wayne LaPierre is always right. And that doesn't mean that the NRA's top executives can always do it. I think in the last 2 years, the signal to me that this was, okay, this is really bad, this is really serious, was when Chris Cox, the man who had been the head of the NRA ILA, Institute for Legislative Action, basically their chief lobbyist. And I talked to Chris Cox plenty of times over the years. I think he's really good at his job, really knew Congress inside and out, really knew every aspect of maximizing political pressure on lawmakers to make sure that they did the right thing in the eyes of the NRA. And Chris Cox walking away from the organization is kind of like Derek Jeter quitting the Yankees mid-season. I try to give the right metaphor of somebody who was really dedicated to the organization, seeing it as being full of problems, not wanting to be associated anymore, and walking off and heading and doing something else with his life. Was a kind of giant flashing red sign that this is bad. Unfortunately, reform has not come. The other problem in all this, because I've been critical of the liberal media, I've been critical of the knee-jerk defenders of Wayne LaPierre and the NRA leadership. The other problem is that Tish James is probably the worst possible person to bring this lawsuit, in part because before getting elected, she's characterized the NRA as a terrorist organization.
Right.
Now, I think that is an absurd and really almost an offensive form of hyperbole in light of the fact of what we've seen actual terrorists do. People who think differently than you and believe the Constitution's Second Amendment means what it says, they're not terrorists. You can think they're wrong. You can think they're completely, you can argue the Second Amendment should be repealed. You can do whatever you want, but calling these people terrorists. But then the next thing is that, Tish James had legitimate concerns about NRA management fall in her lap. And now she's going after them and attempting to disband them. And a whole bunch of people at the NRA who probably would want to hand wave away those bad expenditures can say Tish James is on a political vendetta. And for all intents and purposes, she might be. This may be a story with no particular heroes. I would like to see an effective NRA someday exist, and I don't know the prospects of that are particularly good right now.
Yeah, things are pretty bleak right now for the legal situation for the NRA. I would say is a fair point to make, especially you don't file bankruptcy for nothing.
That's a sign things aren't going your way.
If that's your strategy.
Big conventions, by the way, where a ton of donations usually came in. You had 80,000 people attend most years. The people signed up for lifetime memberships and all that kind of stuff. They usually got a very big cash infusion, and I think the cancellation of this only came 8 days before it was supposed to occur, which was kind of late in it.
That's been really bad for them too financially. But I do think you hit on a good point there about you can look at each side of this situation and find excuses for whatever preconceived notions you have about the NRA or its leadership or Tish James, the Attorney General of New York, or whoever, and just run with that one part of the story, and you'll have a piece of the truth to back you up, right? Yeah, Tish James is biased against the NRA. I think that's fair to say, but also there's serious misconduct that the NRA executives have already admitted to in the bankruptcy case, and Wayne LaPierre admitted to taking $400,000 worth of excess benefits. That's what he admitted to doing already on things
all
like
that wardrobe
flights.
help, and he still dresses like an undertaker. You wonder where all that money was going.
And you can look
black
at
suits. That's all you came up with, really? Right. I could have got that from a Will Smith movie. But anyway.
Right. Yes, you'd think he'd be able to come up with something like what you see at the Met.
There you go, exactly. The fun, wacky side of Wayne LaPierre. Yeah. Okay,
for the money you're spending. Yeah, you should get something a little more flashy than a power suit. But anyway, and of course those were bought by Ackerman McQueen, who you can look at Ackerman McQueen and what they were doing and conclude that they were taking advantage of the NRA, and you could look from Ackerman's point of view and say the NRA was okay with this when it was happening, that they were doing it that this was an intentional thing, and that the NRA that they were providing a lot of what people know as the NRA, the ads, I am the NRA, Charlton Heston was a Ackerman McQueen product, the NRA TV, a lot of the people that you like, Dana Lash and Colion Noir, and a lot of these guys and Cam, that technically worked for Ackerman, not for the NRA, based on how this stuff worked in practice. And so the thing is, you can look at this from any particular point of view and find some piece of truth to back up whatever you want to believe about the situation. And I think it's important for people to try and take a more holistic view of the whole thing. And that's how I try to approach it and be fair, but not compromising towards any of the parties involved. Because I think that's the most important thing for not only the public generally, but the NRA members themselves to be informed about what's happening. And to that point, I would encourage people to go and read the actual updated brief in the case that James has filed for themselves, so they can at least get a full grasp of what the NRA is being accused of, because it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
It's very hard to believe that all of this is made up or innocent misunderstandings or stuff like that. Every organization needs somebody who's kind of a jerk, kind of the guy who's basically say, can we afford it, and is this worth spending money on? Does this advance our core mission? And if the answer is no, we can't do that. And as much as you don't like having that person, you need that person. And what it certainly sounds like is that there was nobody playing that role at the NRA to say, no, we can't afford that, or no, that's not a good expense. No, you don't need a private jet. No, you can buy your own suits. No, you don't need to spend that much. We like Ollie North, but we don't need Ollie North to do a version of his War Stories show for Ackerman McQueen and get paid $1 million or some ungodly sum. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was one of those things where okay, so $1 million for like 9 episodes of a show or something like that. It was just ludicrous expenditures that you could not justify as being in the best interest of the organization. And there was no watchdog. There was nobody around to say, we really shouldn't do that. That's just not a good way to spend members' money. And one of the more frustrating things that I think through this entire process is that the number of members who've been upset about how their money was spent, Stephen, I don't get the feeling it's a big majority at all. I think most members trust Wayne LaPierre. They've trusted him for a very long time. They've trusted all these guys. And they don't want to believe that their money was spent. They must have good reasons for all that stuff. And,
I'm sure there's a lot of that.
I feel like good folks are being taken advantage of.
I will say that a lot of the members that have spoken to me about the situation, most of them are very unhappy. But you haven't seen that materialize in, the board elections or things like that. Although there's been a lot of issues raised with how the board elections work themselves and how the NRA operates internally. That's this is one of the main reasons why James argues that the whole group needs to be shut down rather than just, reformed or have a few
leaders,
executives removed. So, but then obviously, people should read the NRA's reply briefs in these cases to understand, what the arguments from the NRA's lawyers are as well, and be fair to both sides of the issue. But and obviously, I'll keep reporting on what's going on, and I'm sure that we'll probably have more analysis from you that will be insightful as always on the issue. So people should keep up with that, and if they want to keep up with what you're doing and your writing and your podcasting, can you let us know how they can do that?
Sure. At National Review, go to the newsletters page. I write the Morning Jolt. Send it out every morning, Monday through Friday.
Great newsletter.
Usually thank you. About 1,500 words. Sometimes it's about a couple different topics. Sometimes it's just one big topic of the day. I also write National Review's Corner. Sometimes write pieces separately for them. And on Twitter, I am at Jim Geraghty. Please be warned that you're going to get politics Monday through Friday, and then on Sunday, you're just going to hear nonstop profanity about the New York Jets. You've been warned.
That's one of the best reasons to follow. And then you also do podcasts as well.
Yes. So once a day with Greg Columbus of Radio America. We do a podcast called The 3 Martini Lunch. It's usually only about 15 to 25 minutes. We go through 3 topics of the day. We usually try to have a good martini, a bad martini, and a crazy martini. One item in the news that is good for conservatives, one that's bad news for conservatives, and one that's just flat out crazy. We had a lot of bad and crazy lately. We've been good martinis have been few and far between.
For the last
and I also do
5 or 6 years, I would.
Yeah. I also do a pop culture podcast with Mickey White. Yes, we haven't taped one in a very long time. She's on a different work schedule. I've been crazy with stuff. But we do intend to get back to that, and that's kind of the lighter, fluffier, hey, what's on Netflix? What are we enjoying? What's going on in the Marvel Universe? That sort of thing. So
great. We should. I'd love to call on that one, too.
We've had a very select list of guests, in part because we just never get around to it. But, Stephen, I will recommend you. I think you have a good chance.
Good. Good. Put in a good word for me with the hosts.
Will do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on, and I hope we'll have you back on again soon.
Anytime, Stephen. Good to see you.
All right. That's it for this week's episode of the Weekly Reload podcast. Remember, if you buy a membership, you get it a day early and access to a bunch of exclusive content on thereload.com, as well as our Sunday members-only newsletter. So it's a pretty great deal, I think, as the founder of The Reload. I would encourage you to buy the membership. We could not do this without our members. The Reload is a 100% reader-funded publication. It is independent. It does not have backing from any interest groups or big corporations or anything like that. So you guys are the ones who keep it going. But until next week, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun. I had one friend, now there's none. I made the devil run. I broke so many bones, but none of them were ever my own.